Tēnā tātou katoa, good evening. Tonight we can finally reveal the names of the two brothers who drugged and sexually assaulted dozens of women in Christchurch. They are Danny and Roberto Jazz. They operated the Central City bar Mama Hooch and restaurant Venuti where most of the assaults took place. Their years of offending became one of the biggest police prosecutions of its kind in New Zealand. And a warning, Juliet Speedy's reports contain disturbing details.
Two brothers, two predators.
I'm going to deliver verdicts now.
Danny Jazz and his younger sibling Roberto Jazz.
Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Now convicted on a combined total of 69 sexually motivated crimes. Danny was the bar manager at Mama Hooch. Roberto was the bar manager and chef at nearby restaurant Venuti, both in central Christchurch. It was at these two venues over a period of years that the men targeted their young female customers, spiking their drinks and then often sexually assaulting, violating or raping them.
Their role as chef and bar manager respectively gave them significant access to women, particularly to young women.
The two convicted rapists facilitated the planned and determined drugging of many young women to assault and violate them. Much of it happened in the bar and in the toilets. Mama Hooch was one of Christchurch's most popular night spots, where the Jazz brothers rubbed shoulders with top sports stars and the then Prime Minister John Key. The Crown told the court it was all a grand plan when they opened the bar in 2015 and named it Mama Hooch.
The name is a play on the term Hoochie Mama, defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as a young woman, especially a promiscuous one, or one that behaves in a sexually provocative way.
There were initially 126 charges against the defendants from dozens of complainants. Some of the worst assaults were on their own staff. They would hire waitresses and prey on them. This targeting frequently arose in their WhatsApp messaging. Danny Jazz posts a photo, new waitress boys. She is deaf worth a trip down Christchurch. Roberto writes, "She's yours, man. She wore a loose top, no bra." And another waitress. She wants part-time now and blowjobs for the boys on Sunday. And a young woman they raped was a former staff member. Danny Jazz planned it. Trial tomorrow night, boys. Who's keen? The offending happened throughout all the years the bar was open. The young female clients were fair game as far as the Jazz brothers were concerned. Commodities to be used and abused as they saw fit. Danny, the oldest, would frequently offer them drinks, free drinks that were spiked, and then follow them into the toilets to assault and violate them. Or they would drug them and walk them down to Venuti where they'd give them more drugs and assault or rape them. Years into Roberto and Danny's offending, things started to unravel for the Jazz brothers. They were getting a reputation, as these TripAdvisor reviews attest to. I felt so unsafe. The men behind the bar was creepy and touchy, saying disturbing things. Female customers should not be fair game to predators. I have first-hand experience seeing the barman harass female customers. And in July 2018, two brave young women, just teenagers at the time, went to police the morning after they were drugged and assaulted, which led police to start digging.
3 men have appeared in court following a police investigation into drugging and sexual assaults around an inner-city bar in Christchurch.
Media coverage around this night in question saw many women, previously ashamed and embarrassed, come forward to police. This press article includes an interview with Danny Jazz after his brother had been arrested, where he says, "If we caught those responsible, God help them," adding, "If it was a staff member, I'd break their hands and hand them over to police." Ultimately, 8 years after their offending began, it ended in a 2-month trial, which found them guilty on almost every sex charge and many drugging charges.
Guilty, guilty, guilty.
Finally, the brothers were to pay the price for their predatory criminal behaviour against so many young women in the prime of their lives. All of those women, including some former staff and regular customers, came into this courtroom, number 19, and gave courageous and horrifying evidence from this seat. They were hidden behind screens, so they never had to see the Jazz brothers.
There was intense emotion from some and anger from others, and then some lengthy questioning from the men's lawyers, who repeatedly suggested the Jazz brothers had done nothing wrong.
Roberto Jazz walked into court on April 26th, his last morning as a free man.
Any remorse or regret, Roberto? Anything to say to the dozens of brave young women who testified against you?
But silence from one of the worst sexual predators in New Zealand.
You can take the brothers into custody.
And now the brothers are behind bars of a different kind at Christchurch Men's Prison.
Well, Juliet Speedy joins us now live. And Juliet, are Mama Hooch and Venuti still operating?
No, they're not, Alice, but Venuti behind me only closed down 3 months ago after an application to renew its liquor licence was refused. Mama Hooch closed in 2020, a whole 2 years after these crimes first came to light. Look, we've been waiting a very long time to be able to identify these offenders, but we will never show you their victims, as they all have permanent name suppression. But I have interviewed the 2 brave young women who cracked this case wide open, and my next story uses actors to voice their interview and tell their story.
This is the first woman to raise the alarm, seen here on CCTV on a winter's night in 2018 with Roberto Jazz. Shortly after being sexually violated and assaulted, she's high on drugs that he supplied, and to this day she doesn't know what they are. We can't identify her, so we'll call her Sarah. She was with her friend we'll call Anna outside Mama Hooch. They were out celebrating one of them turning just 18 years old. Danny Jazz was there that night, but it was Roberto who led the 2 girls down to Venuti with the offer of free drinks before drugging and sexually violating and assaulting them both. Sarah violated by a man who'd been her boss since her early teens.
I had work relationships with these men since my first years in high school. I learnt from them and I looked up to them.
But instead they targeted and preyed on her. Anna and Sarah's complaints led to police launching Operation Sinatra. Neither they nor any of the women knew how extensive the Jazz's offending was until a month ago, when suppression of the case lapsed.
So that we could ensure that their evidence wasn't tainted or wasn't compromised by any of the other complainants.
Finding out that they had done this to other girls left me with more anger, that I wanted to fight for justice even harder. It also reminded me that it wasn't my fault and I wasn't alone.
Their fight for justice has been unreasonably long, 5 long years since this night. The names of their offenders finally exposed.
Some of the young cops.
Helen Mann-Stroud is the detective who liaised with and supported all of the complainants through years of delays, anxiety and trauma.
At times I felt that I had 30 daughters.
30 young women who brought an end to the depravity of these 2 predators.
I wouldn't say closure, because I don't think this is going to leave them for a long time.
It might impact me for the rest of my life, learning to trust men again and feel safe. Anxiety, PTSD, I'm constantly angry.
Many of the more than 30 complainants had not guilty verdicts.
Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty.
It was hard for the Crown to prove who spiked the drinks. Hard to take for some of the women, but others still pleased they came forward.
They actually felt empowered that they were able to come to court in support of those other complainants.
We wouldn't have had anywhere near as much influence without the other women having the courage to come forward as well. The power comes from everyone involved.
Power the pair want all women in their position to remember.
It doesn't matter how much you had to drink, what you decided to wear, where you are, who you're with, or if you cannot remember anything, tell someone you can trust. You shouldn't have done anything differently. None of it's your fault, and you are not alone.
A sisterhood of complainants, bringing the Jazz brothers to justice.
OK, Juliet, this is a rare prosecution, but is drink spiking a rare crime?
No, Mike, sadly it's not, but it's difficult to detect, and as you just heard, it's also difficult to prosecute. Many of the worst date rape drugs, the ones used in this case, are out of the system, the body, very quickly, and it's very difficult to get through the courts often. As you just heard, most of the not guilty verdicts were around the drugging charges, and it wasn't because the women weren't believed, but it was because they couldn't. It was almost impossible to prove who specifically spiked those drinks. But one top cop based out of Christchurch told me that this case is actually the tip of an iceberg. And the message from police to people going out is to be aware, but also to look after your mates, because there were many stories in this case of women that were drugged, but they were taken away by their friends before the Jazz brothers could get to them.
It's Juliet Speedy, our reporter, live in Christchurch. Thanks for your coverage, Juliet. And if Juliet's story brought up any issues for you, there is a national helpline on 1737 with support available 24/7.